He was my worst college nightmare, and now he's my blind date. 10 years ago, the ruthless alpha Lupin Volkov publicly rejected me and broke my spirit. Now he's back, with a calculated offer that could change my life forever. He says he needs my scientific mind, but his possessive gaze promises something far more dangerous. He's trapped me in his gilded cage of dark family secrets and primal desires, and the closer I get to the truth, the more I realize he's not just fighting his enemies, he's fighting the beast within himself. This is the story of revenge, obsession, and a passion that could burn them both to the ground. To follow every steamy, suspenseful chapter of My Blind Date Was the Ruthless Alpha Who Rejected Me, make sure you subscribe to @Romanticist Shelfie Collections right now and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss out on beautiful stories. Chapter 1. The Unforeseen Encounter. The low, ambient chatter of Aura, the city's latest upscale dining hotspot, did little to soothe the frantic fluttering in Enid's stomach. Blind dates were a circle of hell she rarely chose to enter, but her best friend Layla had been relentless, promising this one was different. He's successful, driven, and from what I hear, devastatingly handsome, she had chirped, sealing Enid's fate. Now, smoothing down her silk emerald dress for the 10th time, Enid sipped her water and scanned the entrance, a sliver of reluctant hope warring with her deep-seated cynicism. She had worked hard to build this new version of herself, confident, sought after in her biogenetics field, a far cry from the shy, invisible girl she'd been in college. That girl was gone, buried under years of dedication and self-respect. The hostess was leading a man toward her table. Enid's breath caught, her polite smile freezing on her face. It couldn't be. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The restaurant was fading into a dull roar in her ears. The man approaching was more than just handsome. He was a force of nature carved from raw power and tailored charcoal wool. His shoulders were broader, his jaw sharper, but those eyes, the color of molten gold, intense and predatory, were unmistakable. It was Lupin Volkov, the alpha of the Crescent Moon Pack, the man who hadn't just rejected her a decade ago, but had shattered her heart with a casual, public cruelty that still echoed in her nightmares. A wave of icy dread washed over her, followed by a surge of white-hot anger. This had to be a joke, a twisted prank. Layla would never do this to her, which meant he had to have orchestrated it. As he stopped before her table, his towering presence cast a shadow over her. A flicker of something, recognition, surprise, and an unreadable emotion, crossed his features before settling into a mask of cool indifference. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her body in a slow, possessive appraisal that made her skin prickle with a humiliating combination of fury and a deeply buried, treacherous awareness. She wanted to run, to throw her water in his impossibly perfect face and storm out. But the girl who ran was the girl he had rejected. The woman, she was now held her ground. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with a coldness she didn't feel. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. He pulled out the chair opposite her, the movement fluid and utterly self-assured. The air crackled, thick with a decade of unspoken history and an immediate, undeniable tension that felt like a physical force. His scent, a primal and intoxicating mix of pine, aged leather, and something wild and musky that was uniquely him, drifted across the table, invading her senses and short-circuiting her resolve. It was the same scent that had haunted her dreams for a year in college. He settled into his chair, the very picture of calm, while her insides were a maelstrom. A slow, deliberate smirk touched his lips, a sight that made her stomach clench with a sickening lurch of memory and unwanted attraction. His voice was just as she remembered, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards and upper spine. Enid Sinclair. It's been a long time. Chapter 2. A Taste of a Forbidden Past. The silence that followed his words was a battlefield. Enid gripped her wine glass, her knuckles white, refusing to let him see the tremor in her hands. She would not be that timid, heartbroken girl again. She forced herself to stay, fueled by a defiant need to prove, to both herself and to him, that his opinion of her no longer mattered. "Lupin!" she said, her voice cooler and steadier than she felt. "What a coincidence!" "I don't believe in coincidences," he replied smoothly, his golden eyes never leaving hers. He signaled the waiter with an almost imperceptible flick of his wrist, ordering a bottle of vintage Cabernet with an authority that left no room for argument. The conversation that followed was a carefully navigated minefield. He asked about her work, his questions unervingly insightful. He spoke of her recent research paper on cellular regeneration, quoting a line from her conclusion verbatim. The realization that he had been following her career sent a chill down her spine. What could he possibly want from her now? For every guarded answer she gave, he offered a small, calculated piece of himself, creating a frustrating illusion of intimacy. Yet, with every word, every shared glance across the table, the memory of that day played in her mind on a torturous loop. She was 19, all nervous energy and hopeful adoration. She had finally worked up the courage to approach him near the university's ancient oak tree, the unofficial gathering spot for his pack. She had confessed her feelings in a rush of breathless words, her heart in her throat. Lupin, surrounded by his powerful friends, had looked down at her not with kindness or even pity, but with a chilling dismissiveness. He hadn't just said no. He had made an example of her. "An Omega-born like you," he'd said, his voice carrying so everyone could hear, "could never hope to stand by an Alpha side. You lack strength, ambition. You're unremarkable." The laughter of his pack mates had been like physical blows, the shame so profound it had nearly choked her. Now, across the table, that same man was looking at her as if she were the most remarkable woman in the room. He leaned forward slightly, the lapels of his suit jacket parting. "You're wondering why we're here," he stated, not a question. "Our meeting tonight was no accident, Enid. A mutual acquaintance who values both of our work believed we had shared interests." The lie was so blatant it was almost insulting. Before she could call him on it, the wine arrived. As he reached for the bottle, his fingers deliberately brushed against hers. The contact was electric, a searing jolt of pure, carnal heat that shot straight up her arm. Her breath hitched. He poured the wine, his movements graceful and precise. He lifted his glass, his gaze dropping to her lips. "It has a complex aroma," he murmured, his voice a low thrum of velvet. "A full body, and a finish that lingers, demanding to be savored." The words were about the wine, but his eyes promised something else entirely. Every syllable was a caress, a deliberate seduction that was both terrifying and thrilling. The dinner was a charade, a power play she didn't understand, and she was losing. When the meal concluded, she stood abruptly, desperate to escape his intoxicating orbit. "Thank you for the dinner." But as she turned to leave, his hand landed firmly on the small of her back, his touch both a courtesy and a brand. "The night is still young, Enid," he said, his voice a possessive whisper near her ear. "I'm taking you home." Chapter 3. The Alpha's Unyielding Gaze. The interior of Lupin's car was a cage of black leather and polished chrome, smelling intoxicatingly of him. The confined space felt charged, the air thick with unspoken words and palpable tension. Enid sat rigidly in the passenger seat, staring out at the blurred city lights, acutely aware of him beside her. He drove with an effortless, predatory grace, one hand resting on the gear shift, mere inches from her knee. He was a man completely at ease with power, both in and out of the driver's seat. His silence wasn't awkward, it was tactical, a heavy blanket designed to suffocate her defenses. Every tick of the engine, every breath he took, seemed amplified in the quiet bubble of the car. She gave him her address in a clipped, curt tone, praying he would just drop her off and this surreal nightmare would end. But as he navigated the streets, she realized with a growing sense of alarm that they weren't headed toward her neighborhood. "This isn't the way," she stated, her voice tight. "It's a more scenic route," he replied, his voice a low, placating rumble that did nothing to calm the frantic beating of her heart. He took them through winding roads, past sprawling mansions hidden behind iron gates. The city fell away, replaced by the dark, looming silhouettes of ancient trees. Primal fear, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of her composure. She was alone in the dark, with the one man who had ever made her feel utterly powerless. Was this his endgame? To isolate her, to frighten her, to prove he still could? He turned on the stereo, and a slow, soulful blues melody filled the car, its intimacy a stark contrast to her inner turmoil. The raw, Melancholic notes of a saxophone seemed to wrap around them, pulling them closer in the darkness. Finally, he spoke, his gaze leaving the road to fix on her. "You've built walls around yourself, Enid. They're high and impressive." He paused, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw. "But I can still see the fire behind them. The fear you used to carry is gone. It's been replaced by a strength that is exceptionally alluring." Before she could formulate a response, he reached across the console. His movements were slow, deliberate, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she was frozen, mesmerized by the intensity in his gaze. His knuckles grazed her cheek as he gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Her skin burned where he touched her, and an involuntary shiver traced its way down her spine. The car, once a spacious luxury sedan, now felt as small as a coffin. The air was heavy, charged with a potent, dangerous energy that left her breathless. A forbidden, treacherous part of her, the part she thought she had killed off long ago, found his absolute control, his unwavering focus on her, undeniably thrilling. He didn't take her home. Instead, he pulled the car to a stop at a secluded viewpoint, a cliff overlooking the glittering expanse of the city lights below. He cut the engine, plunging them into an intimate silence, the world outside their windows falling away completely. She could hear nothing but the sound of her own ragged breathing and the steady, powerful beat of his heart. He turned in his seat, his broad shoulder blocking the door, his body angled fully toward her. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, his eyes were pools of liquid gold, gleaming with a predatory light. "I didn't bring you up here for the view, Enid," he said, his voice a low, husky growl that vibrated through the very leather of her seat. "I brought you here because I have a proposition for you." Chapter 4. An Unexpected Invitation. Enid's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden stillness of the car. A proposition? The audacity of it was breathtaking. After a decade of silence, after the humiliation he'd subjected her to, he thought he could just reappear and offer her, what? A job? An apology? Her defenses, already weakened by his proximity, snapped back into place. "I can't imagine any proposition from you that I would be remotely interested in, Lupin," she said, lacing her voice with as much ice as she could muster. He ignored her dismissal, his golden eyes holding hers with an unwavering intensity. "I know about your research into gene-splicing catalysts. Your work is revolutionary, Enid, years ahead of anyone else in the field." He leaned closer, the space between them shrinking until the only thing separating them was the charged air. "My corporation, Volkov Industries, is on the cusp of a medical breakthrough that will change everything. But we've hit a wall that I believe your specific expertise is uniquely suited to break through." She stared at him, momentarily stunned into silence. He hadn't just been following her career, he had been studying it. He knew the specifics of her highly confidential research. "What are you offering?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm offering you the chance to do the work of a lifetime," he said, his voice dropping, becoming persuasive, hypnotic. "I'm offering you a blank check, a state-of-the-art laboratory built to your exact specifications, a team of your choosing, unlimited resources and zero red tape, everything your heart desires to see your theories become reality. The only condition is that you work exclusively for me." The offer was staggering, a dream so far beyond her wildest ambitions that it felt like a fantasy. It was the kind of opportunity scientists spent their entire lives praying for. But the price was him. It meant stepping into his world, a world of power and control, and placing her future directly into the hands of the man she had every reason to despise. "Why me?" she asked, suspicion warring with the seductive pull of his offer. "There are other geneticists." A dark look flickered in his eyes. "There are, but my rivals are ruthless. They've resorted to industrial espionage, to threats. This project requires absolute secrecy and loyalty. I need someone I know, someone whose history I understand." He paused, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "And someone whose brilliance I have underestimated in the past." To punctuate his words, he closed the remaining distance between them. His scent, musk, pine, and pure male dominance, overwhelmed her. His hand came to rest on her knee, his thumb beginning to draw slow, deliberate circles against the silk of her dress. Fire shot through her veins, pooling low in her belly. "I need your mind, Enid," he murmured, his breath a warm caress against her lips. "But I won't lie. Seeing the woman you've become has ignited other appetites." His gaze was heavy with meaning, a silent promise of pleasure and peril entwined. "The choice is yours. A safe, predictable life in your university lab, or the chance to have everything you've ever dreamed of. With me." He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the flecks of amber in his golden eyes. For one heart-stopping, terrifying moment, she was sure he was going to kiss her. And the most terrifying part was, she wasn't sure she would stop him. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, he pulled back, leaving her breathless and reeling in a vortex of confusion, anger, and a startlingly potent desire. "My driver will take you home," he said, his voice once again cool and controlled. As if on cue, another black car pulled up behind them. "You have 24 hours to decide." Chapter 5, Whispers in the Shadows. The next 24 hours were a waking fever dream. Enid paced the floor of her small apartment, Lupin's impossible offer echoing in her mind. It was a deal with the devil, a gilded cage offered by the one man who had ever made her feel worthless. Her professional ambition, the driving force of her life, screamed at her to accept. An opportunity like this would never come again. It was the key to unlocking her full potential, to leaving her mark on the world. Yet, her instincts, honed by years of self-preservation, screamed just as loudly to run and never look back. To work for Lupin would be to surrender a piece of herself, to be constantly under the shadow of their past and his overwhelming, possessive presence. Finally, after a sleepless night fueled by coffee and internal conflict, her ambition won. She was not the same girl he had known. She was a woman who could stand on her own, who could handle a ruthless alpha. She would take his resources, achieve her goals, and prove to him, and herself, that she was anything but unremarkable. She texted a single word yes to the number he had given her. The reply was instantaneous, an address and a time. The address was not a downtown skyscraper. It was for a sprawling, modern estate nestled deep within a private forest, miles outside the city limits. As her taxi passed through a set of formidable, high-tech security gates, a sense of deep unease settled over her. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, the Wolf's Den. Lupin was waiting for her on the stone steps of the entrance, dressed in a casual black Henley that stretched across his broad chest, a stark contrast to his tailored suit. He looked even more dangerous, more primal, in the setting. "Welcome, Enid," he said, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. He led her inside, the interior a stunning blend of minimalist design and raw, natural elements. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she saw them, guards, moving with a silent, fluid grace along the perimeter. She felt a jolt of recognition. They were like him, werewolves, his pack. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a corporate venture, this was a pack operation. He led her downstairs, and her breath caught in her throat. Before her was the laboratory of her dreams, a gleaming sanctuary of cutting-edge technology that made her university's lab look like a high school science classroom. "It's all yours," he said, watching her reaction with an unnerving focus. He showed her a nearby room, a command center filled with a wall of surveillance monitors displaying feeds of rival corporate headquarters and shadowy figures she didn't recognize. "This is what we're up against," he said, his voice grim. "My enemies are powerful. By accepting my offer, they will become your enemies, too." The full, dangerous weight of the world she had just stepped into began to crush down on her. He must have sensed her fear. He moved to stand behind her, his chest brushing against her back as he gestured toward a piece of equipment. "This will allow you to isolate the gene sequence with unparalleled precision," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against her ear, his breath warm on her skin. His hands came to rest on the steel counter on either side of her, effectively trapping her, caging her in with his body. The heat from him was a palpable force, his scent clouding her thoughts. "Are you afraid, Enid?" he whispered, his lips hovering just inches from her neck. She was drowning in his presence, a dizzying cocktail of fear and fascination rooting her to the spot. Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Breaking his spell, she pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. Her blood ran cold as she read the 2 short sentences. He's not who you think he is. Get out now before it's too late. A gasp escaped her lips. She looked up from the screen, her wide, terrified eyes meeting Lupin's in the reflection on the dark monitor. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, but a ghost of a predatory smile played on his lips, as if he knew exactly who the message was from and precisely what it said. Chapter 6, The Gilded Cage. The anonymous text message burned a hole in Enid's mind. He's not who you think he is. Get out now before it's too late. She quickly shoved the phone back into her pocket, but the damage was done. Her eyes, wide with a fresh wave of fear, darted to Lupin's reflection in the dark monitor. The ghost of a smile on his face confirmed her deepest terror. He knew. He wasn't surprised by the message at all. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual as he turned away from the surveillance wall to face her. My friend Layla," she stammered, the light tasting like ash in her mouth. "Just confirming I'm okay." Lupin took a step closer, his predatory gaze seeming to strip her bare, peeling back the flimsy lie to see the frantic truth cowering beneath. "A predictable move," he said, his voice a low, dismissive rumble. "One of my competitors, no doubt. They can't get to me, so they try to spook my most valuable asset." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, a gesture that was both possessive and strangely reassuring. "You don't need to worry about them. You'll be safer here on the estate." The full implication of his words didn't hit her until he led her from the lab, through a glass-enclosed walkway, and into a stunningly appointed suite in the main house. It was a masterpiece of modern luxury, with a private balcony overlooking the dark, silent forest. It was also a cage. The final nail in the coffin of her independence was seeing her own boxes move from her apartment, stacked neatly in the corner of the massive walk-in closet. He had moved her in without her knowledge, without her consent. The violation was so profound, so absolute, it left her breathless with fury. "You had no right," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "I had every right," he countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Your safety is now my responsibility." He picked up one of the boxes, setting it on the king-sized bed and slicing it open with a pocket knife. He began to unpack it, his movements methodical. He was invading her space, her life, piece by piece. When his large, calloused hands pulled out a delicate piece of black lace lingerie she favored, the air crackled and died in her lungs. He held it up, his gaze dropping from the flimsy fabric to her, his eyes glowing with a heat that made her skin burn. "This will look even better on my floor," he murmured, the words a raw, possessive promise. Flustered, angry, and mortifyingly aroused, she snatched the garment from his hand. "Get out!" He gave a low chuckle, a sound of pure masculine satisfaction, and finally left her alone. Shaking, Enid began to unpack, a desperate need to reclaim some semblance of control driving her. As she plugged in her bedside lamp, her fingers brushed against something small and metallic taped to the underside of the shade. Her blood ran cold. It was a listening device, small and sophisticated. A wave of paranoia washed over her. Had Lupin planted it to monitor her every word? Or had it been placed by the mysterious texter, a warning that the walls of her new gilded cage already had ears? She was trapped in a web of secrets, and she couldn't tell the spider from the fly. Chapter 7, A Touch in the Dark. Enid threw herself into the work. It was her only anchor in the disorienting sea of Lupin's world. The lab became her sanctuary, a place where logic and science reigned supreme, a stark contrast to the volatile, primal emotions that churned within her whenever he was near. And he was always near. He wasn't a micromanager, he never questioned her methods, but his presence was a constant, unnerving hum in the background of her life. He would appear with a cup of coffee just as she was beginning to flag, his quiet observation from the doorway making the fine hairs on her neck stand on end. He would discuss her data with a razor-sharp intellect that both challenged and impressed her, his golden eyes tracking her every micro-expression. One night, lost in the complex dance of gene sequencing, she worked later than usual. The estate was silent, the lab a bubble of light against the oppressive darkness of the surrounding forest. Without warning, the hum of the equipment died, the lights flickered violently, and then plunged her into absolute, terrifying blackness. She gasped, jumping back from the console and stumbling against a stool. Before she could fall, his hands were on her waist, strong and steadying. She hadn't even heard him enter. "I've got you." His voice was a low growl in her ear, a vibration that shot straight through her. He was flush against her back, a wall of solid muscle and radiating heat. The sudden, total darkness amplified everything else. His scent, pine, leather, and that wild, musky undertone of wolf filled her senses, intoxicating and primal. He didn't let go. His thumbs began to stroke the curve of her hips through the thin fabric of her lab coat, slow, possessive circles that melted her bones. "Your scent," he whispered, his breath hot against her earlobe. "It's even more potent in the dark. It drives me insane." Her mind screamed at her to pull away, to protest, but her body betrayed her, leaning back into his embrace, craving the solid strength of him in the disorienting void. Just as his head dipped, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of her neck, the emergency lights flickered on with a hum. The harsh, sterile glow broke the spell, revealing them standing far too close, both breathing heavily, their eyes locked in the dim, intimate light. He reluctantly released her, a muscle feathering in his jaw. Later that week, seeking a moment of peace, she slipped out onto a secluded balcony off the main library. It was then she heard his voice from the room below, low and laced with a cold fury she had never heard before. He was on the phone, his words clipped and lethal. She pressed herself against the stone railing, straining to hear. "No, the breach is contained for now," he snarled. "But it can't happen again." A pause. "She can't find out the truth, not yet. Find the source of the leak and eliminate it. I don't care what it takes." A chill colder than the night air snaked down Enid's spine. Was he talking about the anonymous text? Was she the breach? And what, exactly, was the truth he was so desperate to hide from her? Chapter 8. The Scent of Arrival. Lupin informed her there would be a formal dinner at the estate. It wasn't a request. "It's a mandatory gathering for the pack," he'd stated, his tone brokering no argument. "As a key member of this territory, your presence is required. For integration. For your protection." Enid knew it for what it was, a display. She was his new, brilliant acquisition, and he was putting her on parade. She chose her dress with care, a sheath of blood-red silk that was both elegant and defiant. If she was going to be stared at, she would be unforgettable. The moment she entered the grand dining hall, a hush fell. Dozens of pairs of eyes, many of which glowed with a faint, predatory light in the dim room, turned to her. She felt the weight of their collective gaze, a physical pressure. They were all werewolves, powerful and territorial, and she was the lone human in their midst, an omega born by their standards, yet standing beside their alpha. Lupin's hand was a possessive brand on the small of her back, steering her through the throng. That's when she saw him. He was talking to a group near the fireplace, but his eyes locked on her the second she entered. He was an alpha, that much was clear from his confident posture and the respectful space others gave him. He was handsome in a way that was wilder, more untamed than Lupin's controlled perfection. His hair was a darker shade of brown, his jaw dusted with stubble, and his eyes were a startling, intelligent green. As Lupin introduced other pack members, the man made his way toward them. "Silas," Lupin said, his voice tight. "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us." "Couldn't miss it, Volkov." "The man," Silas replied, his voice a smooth baritone. His gaze, however, was fixed entirely on Enid. "And you must be the brilliant Dr. Sinclair. Your work is legendary." He took her hand, brushing his lips against her knuckles in a gesture that was charmingly archaic and deliberately provocative. His scent was a shock to her system. Wild herbs, rain-soaked earth, and ozone, a storm to Lupin's forest. Later, seeking a breath of fresh air, Enid stepped onto a balcony. Silas appeared beside her moments later. "It's a bit much, isn't it?" he said, gesturing to the intense gathering inside. Lupin always did enjoy his theatrics. He stood closer than necessary, his warmth a buffer against the night chill. "A woman like you seems out of place in all this primitive posturing. You deserve a partner who values your mind as much as your potential." Before she could decipher his meaning, Lupin materialized from the shadows, a silent, menacing thundercloud. He didn't speak a word. He simply placed his hand on the bare skin of Enid's lower back, his touch scorching hot, and glared at Silas. It was a silent, primal declaration of ownership. The air crackled with a tension, so thick it was hard to breathe. With a grip that was just shy of painful, Lupin pulled her away. He didn't stop until they were in a secluded corridor, where he spun her around and backed her against the cold stone wall. His body caged hers, his face inches away. "You are mine," he growled, the sound vibrating through her chest. "He will not touch you. He will not speak to you. Stay away from him." The raw, undiluted jealousy pouring off him was terrifying, but a dark, forbidden part of her flared to life in response to his absolute possession. He didn't kiss her, but his thumb traced the seam of her lips, a punishing, promising caress. "Do you understand me, Enid?" Chapter 9. The Price of Knowledge. The encounter with Silas lit a fire under Enid. Lupin's possessiveness, the secrets swirling around her, the constant, simmering tension, it all fueled her resolve. The lab was her power base, her work the one thing she could control. She pushed herself relentlessly, driven by a desperate need for answers, and within days, she made a breakthrough, a discovery that sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated triumph through her. But to verify it, to take the next step, she needed to cross-reference a specific anomalous protein sequence with case files from Volkov Industries' private database. It was a section she didn't have access to. She found Lupin in his office, a cavernous room of dark wood and glass that overlooked the entire estate. She laid out her findings, her voice crisp and professional, explaining what she needed and why. He listened intently, his golden eyes never leaving her face. Without a word, he nodded, leading her to a terminal in the corner of his office. "I'll grant you access," he said. "But this information is sensitive. I'll stay." The air in the office immediately felt smaller, charged with his presence. She sat at the keyboard, and he stood behind her, watching over her shoulder. She was acutely aware of every breath he took, of the sheer size of him looming over her. His scent was a constant distraction, clouding her focus. As she typed, he pointed to a data string on the screen, leaning down to explain its relevance. His arm brushed against her shoulder, and the hard muscle of his chest pressed against her back for a fleeting moment. Her breath hitched. The contact, however brief, was like a brand. "Right there," he murmured, his lips so close to her ear she could feel the warmth of his breath on her skin. "Isolate that marker." His voice was a low, intimate vibration that made her shiver. "You're so brilliant when you're focused," he whispered, the words a seductive caress that had nothing to do with science. She could barely breathe, every nerve ending firing with a heightened awareness of him. It was a struggle to keep her fingers from shaking on the keyboard. Then she saw it. As she navigated the directory, a single file name caught her eye. It was different from the others, which were labeled with clinical-sounding project titles. This one was heavily encrypted, but its name was a simple string of numbers. October 23rd, 1998. Her birth date. Her blood turned to ice in her veins. 1,000 questions exploded in her mind. What was this? Why was her birthday the name of a top-secret, encrypted file in his private database? Without thinking, she moved the cursor, the arrow hovering over the file. She had to know. As her finger twitched to click, his hand shot out, clamping down over hers on the mouse, his grip like steel. His body heat, his seductive whispers, all of it vanished, replaced by an aura of absolute, lethal cold. "That," Lupin said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion, "is not part of your research." He pulled her hand away from the mouse, his grip unrelenting. The sudden, chilling transformation was the most terrifying thing she had witnessed yet. The passion, the possession, she could understand. But this cold, hard wall of secrecy was something new, something far more dangerous. Chapter 10. The Unveiling. Enid couldn't sleep. The image of the encrypted file, her birth date, was burned onto the inside of her eyelids. Every theory she had was suspect. Every word Lupin had said now seemed like a potential lie. His obsession with her, the coincidence of their blind date, his insistence that it had to be her for this project, it was all connected to that file. The pursuit of scientific truth was her life's calling, and now her own life had become the greatest mystery of all. She had to know. She found him in his private gym the next morning. The room was a temple of steel and glass, and he was its vengeful god. He was in the middle of a brutal workout, his shirtless back, slick with sweat, a breathtaking landscape of corded muscle and raw power. The air was thick with the scent of his exertion. He moved with a lethal grace, every lift, every pull, an exercise in controlled violence. The sight of him, so primal and untamed, should have sent her running. Instead, she stood her ground. He sensed her presence, slowly lowering a heavy set of weights before turning to face her. His chest was heaving, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that pinned her to the spot. "What do you want, Enid?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "The truth," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "What is in that file? Why is it named with my birthday?" He said nothing, just started walking toward her, a predator stalking his prey. She instinctively backed away until her shoulders hit the cool, solid glass of the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the forest. He cornered her, placing his hands on the glass on either side of her head, caging her in with his body. The heat rolling off his skin was immense. "Some doors are best left unopened," he rasped, his eyes boring into hers. "I don't care," she shot back, her fear warring with her desperate need to understand. "You brought me into this. I have a right to know." A dark, tortured look crossed his face. He leaned in closer, their bodies almost touching, the air between them electric with sweat and secrets. "You want to know what this is all about?" he asked, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "You want to know why I brought you here? Why it had to be you and only you?" Her throat was tight, but she managed a nod. His gaze dropped to her lips. He leaned in, and for a heart-stopping second, his mouth hovered over hers, a breath away. "Because the breakthrough we're working on, the cure your research is making possible," he murmured against her lips, his confession a devastatingly intimate blow. "It isn't for some anonymous patient." His eyes, filled with a desperate, ancient pain, met hers. "The subject we're trying to cure is me." Before she could process the shock, before she could even breathe, he closed the final millimeter of space. His lips crashed down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was hard, possessive, and desperate. A kiss that tasted of secrets and a decade of suppressed, agonizing hunger. It was a kiss that broke through every one of her walls, an unveiling and a claiming, all at once. And as he kissed her, a single, terrifying thought crystallized in her mind. He wasn't just trying to cure himself. He was trying to cure himself of something. And somehow, she was not just the key, she was the lock. Chapter 11, The Aftermath of a Kiss. The world tilted and then shattered. The kiss was not a gentle exploration. It was a desperate, frantic collision, a decade of denial and hunger compressed into a single, brutal act of possession. It was the taste of scotch, secrets, and a soul-deep agony that she felt in her own bones. Her mind screamed in protest, but her body, a traitor to its own cause, ignited under his touch. Her hands, which should have pushed him away, fisted in the damp fabric of his workout pants, pulling him impossibly closer. She met his raw desperation with her own, a long-buried part of her recognizing the same hopeless craving in him. He broke the kiss as violently as he had started it, pulling back with a guttural gasp, his chest heaving. In his golden eyes, for one unguarded moment, she saw not the ruthless alpha or the calculating CEO, but a man drowning, clinging to her as if she were the last piece of driftwood in a raging storm. Vulnerability radiated from him, so raw and profound it was physically painful to witness. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The mask of cold control slammed back into place, his features hardening into impenetrable stone. "Now you know," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. He stepped back, putting a torturous distance between them. "It's a genetic flaw, a degradation that surfaces in the prime of the Volkov line. It enhances strength, speed, senses, but at a cost." He turned from her, pacing the length of the gym like a caged wolf. "It creates an instability, a rage, uncontrollable. Over time, it consumes the host, burning them out until there is nothing left but the beast." Enid stood frozen, her lips still tingling, her mind reeling. This was the truth he was hiding. He wasn't just a werewolf, he was afflicted, cursed with a power that was slowly, inevitably destroying him from the inside out. Her scientific mind, her only shield, scrambled to make sense of it. And you believe my research? The catalyst can stabilize the sequence. He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression grim. It can rewrite it, eradicate the flaw without sacrificing the strength. Your theories are the only thing that have ever come close to a viable solution. He walked back toward her, his intensity of physical force. He didn't touch her, but his gaze was a brand, staking a claim that the kiss had already sealed. This is why you can't leave. It's why no one else can know. My rivals, my enemies, if they knew of this weakness, they would tear me and my pack apart. He let that hang in the air, the unspoken threat clear. Her safety was now intrinsically, irrevocably tied to his survival. He had bound her to him, not with contracts or cages, but with his own life. As she stood there, trapped in the gravitational pull of his confession, she noticed something she hadn't before. A series of faint, silvery scars crisscrossing the hard muscle of his forearm. They weren't battle scars. They looked like he had clawed them into his own flesh. Chapter 12. A glimpse into the beast. Enid sought refuge in the sterile quiet of the lab, her mind a chaotic whirlwind of data and sensation. The ghost of his kiss still lingered on her lips, a phantom heat that distracted and unnerved her. She tried to compartmentalize, to separate the man from the patient, the kiss from the cure. She pulled up the limited medical data he had given her, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard with a new, frantic urgency. She wasn't just solving a puzzle anymore, she was trying to defuse a bomb, and the timer was ticking inside the man who had just shattered her world. There it was, an anomalous protein, a rogue marker she had previously dismissed as a data corruption. Now, viewed through the lens of his confession, it was terrifyingly clear. It was an accelerant, a genetic catalyst for cellular decay, even as it promoted superhuman regeneration. He was healing and falling apart at the exact same time. The instability he spoke of wasn't just a turn of phrase, it was a literal, biological reality. A piercing alarm suddenly blared through the estate, its shrill cry of violent intrusion into the lab's silence. Red lights flashed, and steel shutters slammed down over the windows, plunging the room into an eerie crimson glow. A perimeter breach. Enid's heart leaped into her throat. Through the lab's internal security feed, she saw chaos erupting on the grounds. Figures clad in black tactical gear were engaging Lupin's guards. But her eyes were drawn to a single figure moving with impossible speed. It was Lupin. He was a blur of motion, a phantom of controlled violence dispatching intruders with a brutal efficiency that was both magnificent and terrifying. Then she saw it. One of the intruders managed to get a shot off. Not a bullet, but some kind of tranquilizer dart that embedded itself in Lupin's shoulder. He barely flinched, ripping it out with a snarl. But something changed. He stumbled for a second, his head thrown back. On the high-resolution monitor, she saw his eyes. The familiar gold was gone, bled out by a feral, burning red. A low, guttural roar, more animal than human, tore from his throat, a sound so primal it vibrated through the floor and up her spine. The beast he spoke of was no longer a metaphor. It was real, and it was fighting for control. The breach was contained within minutes. The alarms fell silent, the red lights replaced by the normal, steady white. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the alarm. She stayed locked in the lab, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hours later, the door slid open. It was Lupin. He was changed back, his suit immaculate save for a small tear in the shoulder, but the air around him was different, heavy with the lingering charge of violence. His eyes were gold again, but a dangerous red flickered at their edges, like embers from a barely contained fire. "You see now," he said, his voice flat. "You see what I'm fighting." He took a step closer, and she could smell the coppery scent of blood beneath his cologne. "This is why your work is so important, Enid. You are the only one who can keep that," he gestured vaguely toward the grounds, "from becoming all I am." Chapter 13. The Whispering Ghost. The sight of Lupin's transformation haunted Enid's every waking moment and stalked her in her dreams. He was a paradox, a man of immense control, desperately battling a force of pure chaos within himself. The kiss, his confession, the attack, it had all been a calculated risk on his part, designed to bind her to his cause. And it had worked. His problem was now her problem, his fate intertwined with her success or failure. But the more she learned, the more questions she had. Her phone buzzed late one night, the screen illuminating the darkness of her suite. Another text from the unknown number. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a single line of code, an override sequence, followed by a location. West Wing. 3rd floor. The solarium. A chill traced its way down her spine. The West Wing was a part of the estate she'd been tacitly warned away from. It was kept dark, the doors always locked. It was Lupin's past, his private domain. The anonymous texter, her whispering ghost, was pushing her to commit a cardinal sin, to trespass on the Alpha's most sacred ground. Every instinct for self-preservation told her to delete the message and forget it. But the instinct of a scientist, the insatiable need to know, was stronger. This ghost clearly knew things about Lupin that she didn't, and they were trying to lead her to an answer. She waited 2 days, her nerves stretched to their breaking point. She watched Lupin's schedule, noting the rare moments he left the estate for high-stakes business in the city. When her chance finally came, her heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of her chest. The house was unnervingly silent, the pack guards a subtle, ever-present threat. She felt their eyes on her as she made her way from the lab, feigning a trip to the library. Her hands trembled as she slipped down the dark, dust-sheeted corridor of the West Wing. The air here was stale, thick with the scent of memory and decay. She found the solarium at the end of the hall, a grand room with glass walls, now opaque with grime. Taking a deep breath, she typed the override sequence into the keypad beside the ornate double doors. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the lock disengaged. She pushed the door open, the creak of its hinges echoing like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The room was not what she expected. It was a preserved study, frozen in time. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but underneath it, she could see a life interrupted. Books on advanced genetic theory lay open on a desk, a dried-out pen resting beside them. But it was the large, oil-painted portrait above the marble fireplace that stole her breath. It was a family, a stern-looking older man who shared Lupin's powerful build, a graceful woman with sad eyes, and 2 young men standing behind them. One was unmistakably a teenage Lupin. The other, with the same intense eyes but a wilder smile, she recognized him instantly from the dinner party. It was Silas. As her mind struggled to process the fact that they were brothers, her eyes fell upon the desk. Lying beside the open books was a leather-bound journal. Her hand shook as she reached for it, wiping the dust from the embossed initials on the cover, D.V. Lupin Volkov. Not Lupin's initial, but perhaps his father's? The chapter ended as she opened the journal to the first page, her blood running cold as she read the frantic, desperate handwriting. The degradation is accelerating. The boy is getting worse. Chapter 14. Skeletons in the Closet. The journal was a descent into a nightmare. The handwriting, elegant at first, grew more erratic and desperate with each entry. It was the personal log of Lupin Volkov, Lupin's father, a brilliant geneticist in his own right. Enid sank into the dusty armchair by the desk, a plume of dust motes dancing in the faint light, and read, completely captivated by the horror story unfolding in the brittle pages. Damien wrote of the Volkov curse, a genetic flaw passed to the firstborn son, a trade-off for their immense alpha power. He chronicled his frantic, obsessive search for a cure, not for himself, but for his eldest son. Not Lupin, his elder brother, whose name Enid couldn't find mentioned. The journal detailed a radical, unsanctioned experiment, an attempt to splice the unstable wolf gene with a stabilizing agent. An attempt that went catastrophically wrong. The serum was a failure, one entry screamed across the page. It didn't stabilize him. It unleashed him. The beast is all that's left. He doesn't know us. He tried to. God forgive me, he tried to kill his own mother. I had no choice. I locked him away. Enid's hands trembled, the journal nearly slipping from her grasp. Lupin had an older brother, one who had fully succumbed to the degradation, transformed into a mindless beast by his own father's failed cure. A series of photos were tucked into the back of the journal. A younger Lupin and Silas, laughing together. Another of the whole family, happy and whole. And one of a young man she didn't recognize, the eldest brother, his eyes the same molten gold as Lupin's, but a shadow already lurked behind his smile. The final entries were barely legible, a mad scrawl of guilt and terror. He's gone. Broke containment. He killed her. My beautiful Elena. My fault. It's all my fault. Silas saw what I did. He saw what our brother became. He will never forgive me. And Lupin, the boy carries the same curse. He saw it all. A wave of nausea washed over Enid. This was the truth Lupin was hiding. His mother hadn't died of an illness. She was killed by her own son, a monster created by her husband. Lupin and Silas hadn't just lost their mother and brother, they had witnessed the tragedy firsthand. And Lupin, the second son, had inherited the same ticking time bomb in his DNA. Her work wasn't a pioneering new science. It was a desperate attempt to avoid repeating the most horrific event imaginable. Her head snapped up at the sound of a floorboard creaking in the hallway. Her heart stopped. She was so engrossed she hadn't been listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, coming closer. Frantically, she shoved the journal back onto the desk, scrambling out of the chair and diving behind a heavy, velvet curtain that smelled of dust and time. Her body was rigid with terror, her breathing shallow. She had just seconds to spare. The doorknob turned with a groan, and the door swung open, casting a long silhouette into the tomb-like room. Chapter 15, The Unholy Trinity. The figure in the doorway was not the looming, broad-shouldered silhouette of Lupin. It was leaner, carrying a different kind of tension. As he stepped into the room, the faint light from the hall illuminated his features. It was Silas. He moved into the room with a somber familiarity, his green eyes sweeping over the dusty relics with a profound, gut-wrenching sadness. He walked straight to the portrait above the fireplace, his hand rising to gently trace the face of the woman, his mother. "I'm sorry, Mother," he whispered, his voice thick with a grief that felt as fresh as if the tragedy had happened yesterday. "I won't let him make the same mistake. I won't let him sacrifice another innocent life for his selfish cure." Enid's breath caught in her throat, trapped behind her teeth. Another innocent life. Was he talking about her? Silas turned from the portrait, his gaze falling upon the desk. He saw the journal, his eyes narrowing. He saw the slight indentation in the dust on the armchair where Enid had been sitting. He knew someone had been there. His body went rigid, his head snapping up as he scanned the shadows of the room. He was hunting. Before he could find her, another shadow fell across the doorway. "What are you doing in here, brother?" Lupin's voice was a low, dangerous growl, laced with ice and fury. He stood there, an immovable object, his presence sucking all the air from the room. Silas didn't seem surprised. He turned slowly to face his younger brother, a bitter, mocking smile on his lips. Reminiscing, remembering all the secrets this family is built on. Remembering the last time a Volkov Alpha promised a miracle cure and delivered a massacre instead. "Get out!" Lupin snarled, taking a step into the room. The air crackled, thick with a hatred so potent Enid could almost taste it. "Not until you stop this madness," Silas shot back, his own voice rising with power. "You're using her, just like Father used our brother as his guinea pig. You think she's your salvation, but you'll end up destroying her, just like he destroyed everything he touched." "You know nothing," Lupin retorted, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I am not my father. And she," he said, his golden eyes blazing, "is not your concern. She became my concern the moment you dragged her into this cursed family." As they faced off, two powerful alphas on the verge of tearing each other apart amidst the ghosts of their past, a small, involuntary gasp escaped Enid's lips. It was barely a sound, but in the supernaturally silent standoff, it was a thunderclap. In perfect, terrifying unison, both had snapped in her direction. Two pairs of glowing alpha eyes, one molten gold, one emerald green, pinned her to her hiding spot in the oppressive darkness. The brothers, the rivals, the grieving sons, they had found their common ground. And it was her. She was trapped. Chapter 16, The Unraveling. The world shrank to the dusty, shadow-filled solarium, the air thick with the suffocating weight of a century of familial hatred. Enid was pinned like a butterfly, impaled by two sets of glowing, predatory eyes. For a heart-stopping moment, the brothers were united in their shock, their private war forgotten in the face of her discovery. Then, the fragile truce shattered. "What have you done?" Lupin snarled, his voice a low, rumbling threat. But his fury wasn't directed at her. It was a venomous lance aimed straight at Silas. You led her here. You filled her head with your poison. He moved with fluid, deadly speed, crossing the room to stand in front of Enid, shielding her with his body. He reached back, his hand gripping her arm, pulling her from behind the curtain and securing her to his side. The gesture was meant to be protective, but it felt like a shackle. I showed her the truth you were too much of a coward to reveal. Silas countered, his green eyes flashing with righteous fury. He took a step forward, undaunted by Lupin's menacing posture. Tell her the rest of it, brother. Tell her why Father's cure required our mother. Tell her about the vital biological marker he had to extract from her, a catalyst without which his serum was nothing but poison. He locked his gaze on Enid, his voice dropping, becoming a venomous whisper that slid past Lupin's defenses and struck her to the core. And then tell her how you found that same rare, recessive marker in her DNA. Tell her this isn't a partnership. It's a harvest. The word hung in the air, ugly and obscene. Harvest. Enid's blood turned to ice. She looked from Silas's accusing face to Lupin's rigid back, her mind a maelstrom of horror and disbelief. It couldn't be. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. His unnatural obsession, his refusal to let anyone else on the project, the file with her birth date. He wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for a donor. A sacrifice. He's twisting the truth, Lupin growled, his grip on her arm tightening until it hurt. He refused to look at her, his eyes still fixed on Silas. It's not a harvest. It's a bond. A symbiotic connection that would stabilize the process. It would require a sample. Nothing more. A sample. Silas laughed, a harsh, broken sound. That's what Father called it. And it cost our mother her life force, left her weak and vulnerable when the beast our brother had become came for her. You're following his exact footsteps, and you're going to get her killed. The last vestiges of Enid's trust crumbled into dust. She felt profoundly, horrifyingly used. She was not a colleague. She was a resource, a means to an end, a primal surge of terror, stronger than any desire she had ever felt, flooded her veins. She ripped her arm from Lupin's grasp, the sudden movement startling him. Don't touch me, she breathed, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. She stumbled backward, away from both of them, her only thought to flee, to escape the suffocating poison of his family. She turned and ran, but she only made it 2 steps before Lupin's hand clamped around her wrist again, his desperation making his grip brutal. He spun her around, his golden eyes wild with a terrifying fear of losing her. You are not leaving, he commanded. The physical act of being stopped, of being held against her will, was the final, terrifying confirmation. This wasn't a home, a lab, or a partnership. It was a prison. Chapter 17, A Desperate Alliance. The world outside her suite might as well have ceased to exist. Lupin had escorted her from the West Wing in a thunderous, terrifying silence and confined her to her rooms. 2 of his most formidable pack guards were now stationed outside her door, their stoic presence a constant reminder that she was no longer a guest or a colleague but a prisoner. He was terrified of Silas getting to her again, terrified of her running, but his fear manifested as absolute control, and to Enid, it was the ultimate violation. The gilded cage had become a cold, hard reality. She paced the length of the luxurious room like a trapped animal, her mind a frantic battlefield. Silas's words echoed in a relentless, torturous loop. It's a harvest. She pulled up her own research on her tablet, her personal project files she kept triple encrypted. She ran a diagnostic on her own DNA sequence, which she had on file from a university study. There it was, a dormant, incredibly rare genetic marker she'd always considered junk DNA. A marker that, when cross-referenced with the data from Lupin's affliction, created a theoretical biochemical resonance. It would act as a perfect, living catalyst. He hadn't just been looking for a brilliant scientist. He had been looking for her. The search hadn't started with her research paper. It had started with her bloodline. Hours bled into a day, then 2. Food was left outside her door. Lupin didn't come. She assumed he was giving her space, but it felt like he was letting her stew in her own powerlessness. On the second night, A message alert popped up not on her phone, but on the secure, closed network terminal connected to the main lab. The terminal she alone had access to. A string of code flashed, bypassing the firewall, and then a single line of text appeared. He has you under surveillance. But not in the lab. I can create a window. 1 hour. Be ready. S. Silas. He was her whispering ghost. He had found a back door into the system. Enid stared at the message, her heart hammering. Could she trust him? He had revealed the horrifying truth, but his motives were still shrouded in a bitter, vengeful haze. Was he trying to rescue her, or was this just another move in the toxic chess match against his brother? She was a pawn caught between two warring kings. But what other choice did she have? To stay was to submit to Lupin's plan, to become a living sacrifice for his cure. To trust Silas was a gamble, a leap into an unknown darkness, but at least it was a chance. It was action, not submission. With trembling fingers, she typed her reply, a simple, desperate word, when the plan came in pieces, encrypted and routed through anonymous servers. Silas would trigger a cascading system's failure at the estate's geothermal power plant on the opposite side of the territory. The ensuing chaos would be a massive, irresistible diversion, pulling every guard, and most importantly, Lupin himself. It would give her a small window to get to a weak point in the perimeter fence. She spent the next day playing the part of the broken, compliant captive. When Lupin finally came to her door, his face etched with exhaustion and regret, she didn't fight. She was numb, quiet, letting him believe he had broken her spirit. He tried to explain, to soften the word harvest into symbiosis, but his words were hollow, meaningless. All she saw was the cage. All she could think about was the escape. The steamy tension that had once filled the air between them had curdled into a cold, high-stakes game of deception. Chapter 18. The Escape and the Betrayal. The first explosion was a low, distant thud that vibrated through the floor of her suite. It was followed by a series of smaller, concussive blasts. The estate's alarms, a different set than before, erupted in a cacophony of urgent, piercing shrieks. Enid's heart leaped into her throat. It was the signal. Through her window, she saw guards running, their movements frantic as they headed toward the thick plume of black smoke rising in the distance. She heard Lupin's voice in the hall, a sharp, commanding roar, barking orders. Then, the heavy thud of his footsteps receded down the corridor. He was gone. The diversion was working. Her door guards, their attention torn, exchanged a nervous glance. That was her moment. In her lab coat pocket, she clutched the small device she had jury-rigged, a high-frequency emitter designed to disrupt the electronic lock sets on the estate. It was a prototype, untested. Praying it would work, she activated it. The small keypad on her door sputtered, flashed green, and with a soft click, the lock disengaged. She slipped out into the empty hallway, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Navigating the deserted corridors was a nerve-shredding ordeal. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. She followed the route Silas had sent her, a labyrinthine path through service tunnels and forgotten passageways. Finally, she emerged into the cool night air near the manicured botanical gardens. A figure stepped from behind a large, ancient oak tree. It was Silas. "I was beginning to worry," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. He took her hand, his grip firm and cool. "We have to move. Now." He led her through the darkness, his movements confident and silent. He was her rescuer, her only hope, and as they ran, a confusing mix of gratitude and a persistent, undeniable attraction churned within her. He was still a powerful, dangerous alpha, and in this moment, he was her savior. They reached the perimeter, a 10-foot-high wall embedded with a formidable security system. A small section, however, was dark, the power cut by Silas. "This way," he breathed, helping her through a gap he'd created in the electrified mesh. They were out. Freedom. Relief washed over her in a dizzying wave. But it was short-lived. As they stepped into the relative darkness of the woods beyond the wall, the area was suddenly flooded with the blinding glare of headlights. 2 black SUVs, engines rumbling, blocked their path. Men in dark tactical gear, armed with advanced weaponry, emerged from the vehicles. Their movements were precise, professional. They weren't Lupin's guards. A man in a sharp suit stepped forward, a cruel, satisfied smile on his face. Enid recognized him from the surveillance files in Lupin's command center. He was the CEO of a rival biotech firm, a man known for his ruthlessness. "Silas," the man said, his voice slick with victory. "Punctual as always. You've delivered the asset as promised." Enid's world stopped. She turned to Silas, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He released her hand, taking a small step away from her, realigning himself with the newcomers. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a rescue. It was a transaction, a handover. He had never intended to save her. He had intended to sell her. His grief, his anger, his warnings, all of it was real, but it was all secondary to his burning, all-consuming need for revenge. He was willing to sacrifice her, to hand her over to these monsters, just to see his brother fall. "You bastard," she whispered, the words stolen by the wind. Just as the rival guards moved to grab her, a roar tore through the night. It was a sound of pure, untamed fury, more beast than man. From the darkness behind them, Lupin exploded into the clearing. He hadn't fallen for the diversion completely. He had left a tracker on her. His face was a mask of murderous rage, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, feral red. He saw the scene, the rivals, Enid, and his treacherous brother standing beside them. And the Alpha, the man, and the beast within him, finally, completely snapped. Chapter 19, The Devil You Know. The clearing erupted into a maelstrom of primal violence. Lupin was no longer a man fighting a beast. He was the beast unleashed, a blur of shadow and fury. He moved with a speed that seemed to defy physics, a force of nature tearing through the rival guards. The crack of bone and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the ground were a brutal percussion beneath his enraged roars. This wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter, fueled by the deepest betrayal and a possessiveness so absolute it was terrifying to behold. He was fighting for her. Enid was frozen for a moment, caught between the sheer horror and a dark, thrilling awe at the raw power he commanded. Silas, realizing his plan had gone catastrophically wrong, tried to retreat, but Lupin was too fast. He slammed his brother against the side of an SUV with enough force to dent the steel, the sound of the impact echoing through the woods. Amidst the chaos, Enid saw the rival CEO and his lead scientist scrambling near the second vehicle. They weren't trying to flee. The scientist was loading a cartridge into a high-powered rifle. It wasn't bullets. She recognized the color-coded casing, a military-grade neurotoxin, a sedative powerful enough to bring down a bull elephant. It was the same type of agent that had triggered Lupin's partial transformation before, but 100 times stronger. They didn't want him dead. They wanted him subdued, captured. They wanted the beast in a cage so they could dissect it, study it, and weaponize it. In that split second, a choice crystallized in Enid's mind. She could run, disappear into the woods, and escape this whole nightmare. Or she could intervene. She looked at Lupin, who was holding his battered brother up by the throat, his face a mask of agonized rage. He was a monster, a liar, a jailer. But he was her monster, the devil she knew. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers flying across the screen, accessing the estate's internal network through a back door she herself had built. She located the specific frequency for the perimeter fence's electromagnetic field. With a final tap, she rerouted a massive power surge to her precise coordinates. A low hum filled the air, and then, with a deafening crackle, a localized electromagnetic pulse erupted from the fence behind her. The headlights on the SUVs flickered and died. The rival scientist's advanced rifle sparked, its electronic firing mechanism fried and useless. The sudden darkness and silence were her contribution to the battle. Her choice. The distraction was all Lupin needed. He dropped the gasping Silas and surged toward the remaining rivals, dispatching them with a final, brutal efficiency. The clearing fell silent, the only sounds the ragged, heaving breaths of the Alpha and the groans of the wounded. Lupin stood in the center of the carnage, his chest rising and falling, blood dripping from a gash on his cheek. He slowly turned to face her. The feral red in his eyes was receding, draining away to leave the familiar molten gold, now filled with a raw, desperate vulnerability. He had won the battle, but he fully expected to lose her. He had shown her his worst, most monstrous self. He waited for her to scream, to run. But she stood her ground. Her heart was hammering, her body trembling, but she did not move. In his rage, in his violence, she had seen one undeniable truth. His entire world, his control, his very sanity, revolved around her. The devil who would burn the world down to protect her was infinitely better than the one who would sell her to his enemies. "Your affliction," she said, her voice shaking but miraculously clear and firm in the night air. "The cure." She took a hesitant step toward him, toward the carnage and the chaos, choosing her side once and for all. "Let's finish it. Together." Chapter 20, A New Beginning. The aftermath was a silent, grim affair. Silas, defeated and broken, was taken away by Lupin's most trusted guards, his fate an unspoken question that hung in the air between them. They walked back to the estate, the ground littered with the consequences of their choices, and for the first time, there were no lies or half-truths separating them. They were bound not by a contract or a clever deception, but by shared trauma and the brutal honesty of the battlefield. The lab became their world. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Enid was no longer his asset or his captive. She was his partner, his equal in the only war that now mattered. The work was intense, obsessive. The scientific process became a form of profound intimacy as she delved into the very building blocks of his existence. He submitted to every test, every scan, every extraction, laying himself bare for her, trusting her not just with his life, but with the very essence of his soul, the beast included. The simmering tension that had always defined them was still there, but it was deeper now, a current running beneath the surface of their shared purpose. One night, after a grueling 36-hour session, they finally had it. A stable, viable catalyst. A cure. They stood side by side, staring at the perfect, glowing sequence on the holographic display, the culmination of all their pain and effort. Exhaustion and triumph warred within Enid. She looked at Lupin, who was not looking at the screen, but at her. The gratitude, the awe, the raw, unadulterated need in his golden eyes was overwhelming. "Enid," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. He reached out, not to grab or to possess, but to gently cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "You saved me." The last of her walls crumbled. In that moment of shared victory and utter vulnerability, the tension that had been stretched taut for weeks finally snapped. She leaned into his touch, and he met her halfway. The kiss was nothing like their first desperate, brutal encounter. This was a kiss of equals, a slow, deep exploration of a bond forged in fire and secrets. It was an acceptance of everything he was, the ruthless alpha, the tortured man, the powerful beast, and his acceptance of her as the only one strong enough to stand by his side. He lifted her into his arms and carried her from the lab to his private suite, a part of the estate she had never seen. Their lovemaking was a storm and a prayer, a fierce claiming and a gentle surrender. It was the physical manifestation of their new reality, a sealing of their pact. She was not his sacrifice, she was his salvation. And he, in turn, was the only one who could ever understand the fire and ambition that drove her. The cure worked. It was not a magic wand that erased the wolf. Instead, it was an integration. It stabilized the genetic degradation, weaving the beast into the very fabric of the man, giving him absolute control. The feral rage was no longer a separate entity clawing for release. It was a deep well of power that he could now command, tempered by his own will and anchored by his bond with her. The story didn't end with a simple, happily ever after. The corporate rivals would regroup. Other threats loomed on the horizon. But as Enid stood with Lupin on the balcony of his room, overlooking the vast territory that was now their domain, she felt no fear. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her head, his strength a comforting, solid presence. She was no longer just a brilliant scientist, and he was no longer just the ruthless alpha who rejected her. They were a new, formidable power, forged in the crucible of their past. The future was a dangerous, uncertain wilderness, but for the first time, it was theirs to conquer together.